Good afternoon and welcome to this week's tarot reading. This week, I was playing around with the idea of memory and the way we engage with our various memories and how the memories that we have can actually influence the stories that we say about ourselves, both to ourselves and to other people. So the question that I based on as I was doing the reflection and the construction of the reading for this week was, when memories or old stories float to the surface, who is the person that greets them? So as I came up with the question, I started to think of how, like one of the most interesting facts that I have ever heard was how the police and the legal system put very little faith in first person accounts. They're so much happier if they can have facts and data and evidence over someone's, first person account of what happened and who it was. And one of the reasons for that is that memory is fallible, right? Memory is something that gets put into our brains in certain patterns, certain ways, different processes. And it's hard to really tell after a certain amount of time how much of our memories are accurate to what actually happened in the moment. So and what's interesting too is, like, they've done studies and stuff like that where they found that people can tell themselves a story over and over so many times that eventually they can convince themselves that the story is true, only to find out later that, like, the proof, the facts, the data, the other people, everything else kind of counteracts that story. So it's one of the reasons why, like, those big fish tales that people say are so interesting, because you can start a story and a lot of times the kernel of truth in the story, and if you think about myths and legends, this is how they get to be so hugely um, enmeshed into these, like, gigantic fantastical worlds, is because they start with a grain of truth. They start with some form of fact that gets embellished over time, be it from pride, be it from poor memory, be it from, like, fill in the blank kind of thing. And eventually it becomes a collective story or a personal story that is believed to be true. So one of the reasons that I think this happens with memory specifically is that memories are time stamped. We all take in the information from who we were at the moment the event happened. And this means that every memory we carry holds a seed of who we were at the time. And that seed, that perspective, that maturity, that colors pretty much the memory for the duration that we have it. And so this can be one of the reasons why we can get lost in our memories, as we allow that part of who we were to come forward and tell the story and live that story over again, even if it's 20 years later. So learning how to greet our memories and old stories in a way that interrupts these patterns and allows us to meet them on equal footing, it does take time. It really does take a lot of time to be able to say, oh, this is a story I'm living versus this is me revisiting a story. So let's plant our feet on the ground as we look at the memories and stories that are rising to the surface. So the purpose of today's reading is to make space to greet and engage with memories and old stories from your present self's perspective. So now we're going to start to shuffle the cards. And the question that we're going to shuffle in is, how can you engage with the memories and old stories from the perspective of who you are today? So I've had a little bit of a shift in my space, so I have to shuffle my cards over to the side today. So how can you engage with memories and old stories from the perspective of who you are today? That all nicely shuffled up. Right? We'll deck our cards. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right. So the first question that we ask is, what helps you meet the memories and stories as you are today. So when the memories and the stories of the memories starts to come up, right? We have a moment where we have the opportunity to meet them from where we are and who we are right now, or we can meet them from the perspective that the story is coming from and live back in that time, in that moment. So what we want to know is what's going to help us meet the memories as we are and not get lost in that. And so I think is very interesting that the first thing we have is the lover's card, which is saying, the best way that we can meet our memories as who we are now is by choice. We can get caught up in this idea of, and it might sound a little bit weird going this way, but we can get caught up in the fantasy and the romance and the love of being in love with those stories and the what need that they fulfill, right? Like, because a lot of times the stories that really have the biggest influence on our mindset, on our emotions, on the way we interact with other people are because we're actually in love with what those stories give us. Maybe the stories themselves we dislike, we want to push them away or whatever. But when we tell them, there's some kind of hit that we get. And it could be a dopamine hit, it could be something. It's like when people go to the casino, right? They may hate the fact that they know they're going to lose all their money, but there's something about, grabbing that one armed bandit and just giving it a good pull and just waiting in anticipation. And so as the stories come up, we get a moment where we get to pause and choose, am I me in this present moment engaging with this story, or am I going to step back and allow an earlier version of myself to step forward and engage with this story, with this memory? So it's very important that we remember that every time we engage with a memory, every time we engage with a story, we are choosing how we're going to engage with it. And of course, in the beginning, it is very subconscious. It might be rote, it might be habit, it might be routine. But the more that we can be aware of when a story is coming online versus when we are going to be telling a story or living in the present, we have a moment of choice. And it's up to us to really take ownership over the choices that we're making. And again, like I want to say that the choice that we make is neither good nor bad. It's just basically the choice we make is to don a perspective. And so understanding the perspective we're taking and the role and the reason helps us understand how we engage with these memories and these stories. The next question that we have asks, what might help you anchor into your present self? So the memory comes up, you have the choice. Do I engage actively with this memory, or do I allow the memory to kind of take over and just kind of go with the flow? When we're in that moment, we have a moment where we can ground into who we are and really get clarity for the role that we want to play as we're doing this engagement. And so again, another very interesting card to come up is the King of Wands. And I think with this one, it's really interesting in the sense of when it comes to stories, the best storytellers are the ones who are the most charismatic. They are the ones who are the absolute magicians that can weave a story around you. They're the spellcasters that have this ability to just basically sweep you off your feet and allow you to really forget the world that you're living in. If you're somebody that likes movies, you can easily, see why The Lord of the Rings, people will sit there for the 6 to 12 hours that it takes to watch the movies and come out and be like, their butt might be a little bit sore, but they're excited, they're energized about the story, almost as though they have lived the story along with the characters. I have really gotten into audiobooks, and I have very selective narrators that I can sit there and I can just lose myself in their voices and in the stories that they're telling. And some of them are so good, they could literally be reading the phone book and you'd be like, yes, I will sit here and I will just, allow it to take me away. And so what helps you to really ground into your present self, I think when this storyteller shows up, is to really allow yourself to see that it is a storyteller that is there. If you can ground in the understanding that behind this figure, behind the King of Wands, is you, right? Then you understand that you can stay here and you can listen to the story and you can interact with the story and you can hear what the story is telling you beneath the surface. However, if you're in a position where that charismatic comes out of nowhere, sweeps you off your feet, you get to the end of the story and you're like, yes, I've been here before. This has happened. I got caught up again. So it's really interesting. Like one of the things I also find that's interesting with the King of Wands is I think the King of Wands is also an indication of the vitality of the story that's being told, right? So if there's a lot of energy left in the story, then that storyteller has a lot more power, which means it's very important for you to ground into the truth that it is a story. It is something that has happened and it might be embellished and it might be grand and it might be bigger than you really experienced, but to understand it from that perspective. If a story is dead, if it's just embers, then the story is not going to move you. So the best way to ground into who you are in the present is to see how much does this story move you? How much does it motivate other parts of you? Because the more it motivates you, the more you can realize how alive this story, this memory still is versus one that is just a rote, I'm going to just tell you this story. I'm just going to live in this memory. Because the ones that are still alive, that are still carrying a lot of that King of Wands energy, they're the ones that you still have learning that you can gain from, right? The embers, they've lived their course and now they're just basically waiting to die out. And we're the ones that have to allow that to happen and to say this story has, kind of lived its course. Next, we're going to be asking what may be fueling the memories that are resurfacing now, because it's interesting that when you pay attention, you'll start to notice that memories resurface in certain ways. So certain memories will resurface in certain ways and in certain patterns, especially when you're looking at memories that are connected, say, to flashbacks, right? If you have auditory flashbacks, they're going to surface in a different way than a visual memory. They're going to surface in a different way than a sensory one, like a taste one or a scent. And, like sounds and smells and textures, they're also going to be things that bring these memories back. So the memories that are surfacing more frequently, say right now for you, we're looking at, what might be fueling these kinds of things, or what are the things that tend for us to fuel the memories resurfacing. So sometimes there's memories that we want to heal and to know, well, what will lure them out, what will kind of coax them out so that you can work with them. It might be really good to understand the pathways of memories for you. And so here we have temperance. And so this is really interesting because temperance is one of those ones where when you're looking at what's fueling it, I think when you're looking at a question like this with temperance, it's less being balanced and more imbalanced. And what you're going to find, especially when you're dealing with these memories that are very King of Wands driven, right? That are trying to get us to really be alive in that moment and really feel our own body and feel ourselves in the moment, are the ones that push us the most out of our comfort zone, right? We're more likely to engage with these memories if we're in a place where our brains kind of shut off enough for those memories to rise, especially ones that are emotionally driven. Because if the brain comes up and the brain starts, putting its own story in and its own interpretation, then the memories that are coming up from an emotional base will always get trampled over. And so the memories that we're being asked really to explore, that we're being asked to engage with, are the ones that are coming from the periphery. They're the ones that are coming from the liminal spaces, because the only way we can access those is by going into the extremes. Now, this is in no way saying, go put yourself in extremes, but what it's saying is look at the situations in your life where you feel uncomfortable. Look at the situations where something's off, something's out of routine, something's out of sync, something's out of step. something is, pushing you, that your resistance is coming up, something is making you feel, this lack of equilibrium, so that when you're in that state, what comes up, what is coming forward, because those are also probably the memories that are connected to your next growth point and your next step on your journey. And so as you go through all of this, as you face these, as you meet these, and you engage with them and you hear what they have to say, and you understand the perspective that memory is living from, and how you can meet that memory from the perspective you're living at right now. And I think that's also something that's very clear to understand, is who we are in this moment is going to be different in the next moment. And the memories are asking to come forward to meet who we are right now. And so if my memories come up and I'm angry, there's a reason this memory's coming up when I'm angry. If the memory's coming up and I'm sad, there's a reason that memory's coming up. And we're asking to meet it on equal ground. And I think that's where the temperance piece is coming in, is we're going to the extremes to find where the memories are coming through, bringing them forward into the center where we can meet them on equal footing, and we can offer like that compassion, that kindness, that understanding, that listening that really needs to be done from this story's perspective. The next one we have is what spaces may have awakened these memories. So just like I was talking about how sensory can bring a memory forward, spaces also can do the same thing. Relationships can also do the same thing. It's kind of asking, did you ever notice that when you're with a certain person, you're always telling a certain story that you only ever really tell with that person or that type of person in your life? A lot of the ones for me that I feel that come forward where I can really point to this is I have a set of stories that come out when I visit family. And it's because a lot of my family stories are based from when I was a young child. And so whenever I go into my family spaces, it's always interesting to me, where before I never realized, and only recently in the past few years do I realize, whenever I enter these spaces, I literally take on a different role. And I have a story that I say that's different from the moment I leave that space. And so this is what we're looking at, is what relationships and spaces hold stories for us, so that we can understand and engage with them at the level they want. Because if you try to take a story, say you try to take a story from school and you're by yourself and you're trying to pull that story forward, it's going to land much differently than if you reconnect with somebody that you went to school with and you have it. Because that's also the difference between the King of Wands, is if I am trying to deal with a school-based story, school-based memory in therapy, it may be different. I may get different results than if I actually had just had coffee with an old school friend and a lot of the memories start to come up and start, or if I'm going through an old school yearbook, right? So that's the other thing of where the life of these stories are living. So it might feel at first like it's an ember, and then you end up in that situation going, oh my goodness, this is a raging forest fire. It's also because of where the stories are coming from. And it's very, very interesting because we have the Two of Pentacles. We just came out of, temperance, where it was about going off to the extremes and then meeting in the middle ground. And now we have another balancing card, right? The Two of Pentacles is very much about what are you balancing, right? And it could be that maybe there's multiple meeting points for some of these memories, and it's hard to pinpoint which ones they are, because maybe you have some stories that are interwoven with others, and so it's very hard and difficult to understand where one story ends and another story picks up. Because if you have, let's say, stories from when you were growing up, and then you get into relationships and those relationships have issues, then some of the story connectors between the issues in the relationship and the issues when you were a child now have enmeshed, and they've tied together and they're a knot. And so learning to untangle them, that takes practice, that takes time. And because it's pentacles, it's also saying it takes presence and at the beginning stages of things. So this is maybe something that's also asking for you to have some kind of grounding practice that allows you to reconnect with yourself and asking, like when you walk into a space, feeling where your body's feeling, and then seeing what memories might come up, what stories might start to be told, and how that feels. And if you can connect that physical feeling with that story, then when you go someplace else, if that story comes up, but it doesn't have that physical feeling, then it really helps you to understand what places those stories are grounded and rooted in. And our final question asks, what voice greets you at the threshold? And this is an interesting question because for me, this question is asking, what is the voice of the story? Because as the story changes, the voice of the story will change. Working through a lot of people that work through childhood stories, right? The story will first be told from, say, a 2-year-old perspective. And the more they work with that story, the more that 2-year-old will grow and mature to the point where the story can come out and story be told in your own voice for where you are. And so this is the Seven of Pentacles. And this one's another one that makes an interesting place here for this, for the answer to this question, because we're asking a question about voice, which you would maybe expect an air card to come up or even a water card to come up. And what we get is we get earth, we get quiet, we get silence, we get stillness. And that I find is really, really interesting because the voice that greets you is really in that silence, in that pause, right? Because the thing is the voice might come and greet you, and there might be a voice there, and it might be very hyper, it might be active, it might have a lot to say, but it's in the moments in between where you listen and you feel what is actually behind the voice. And what I mean by that is that as I'm sitting here and I'm contemplating this card and the question that it's asking, what it's saying is that patience is the voice that's greeting. And it's almost like the story's going to keep coming back, and it's going to keep coming back, and it's going to keep coming back until we are willing to pause, until we are willing to put a space between the story and ourselves to say, okay, yes, I see you. Yes, I hear you. Now wait before you continue so that I can be here and you can see me and you can hear me as much as I can see and I can hear you. And this is definitely a practice that needs to be cultivated. It's when I was writing up the spread, one of the things that I had thought about was this idea of pattern interrupt, right? And how when a story shows up, it can often come and sweep us away. But if the story's coming up because it has something to say, it wants to see how we're going to greet it. And so having the Seven of Pentacles coming up as the voice of the story that meets us, right? Because I think that's what I had asked. Yeah. What is the voice? What voice greets you at the threshold? And I think what this makes me also think about is the Seven of Cups now is less the voice of the story and more the voice of the space, right? That threshold. So when you come to the story or the story comes to you, there's a gap in between. And this is what's sitting in that gap. The Seven of Pentacles is saying, wait, story wait, person wait. Look at each other, feel each other, see where both of you are. Because the thing is even if I'm here in the present moment and I'm engaging with the story and I'm saying, this is a story from when I was 10, then I'm going to expect that story to still be time-stamped as from when I was 10. But if I stop and I take a pause and I look and I listen to the story, I may find that that story is no longer 10. That story may have evolved because all stories will evolve over time. And we have to be patient and we have to be, you know, quiet and calm so we can catch those moments when something in the story shifts, when something, some element, some feeling in the story changes. So I think this is definitely an interesting story when we're dealing with memory, because I think, like, especially with the Seven of Pentacles, I'm going to go back to that original opening about how the police prefer facts and data. And this is kind of that idea, right? If they take what first comes and they take that story And a lot of times they're getting first person accounts from people who are traumatized or have seen something horrific. They're getting whatever the lizard brain is wanting to share. And then when the brain comes back online, they start to question, they start to second guess, and maybe they were wrong, or maybe this happened, or maybe that's what happened. And so then they start to doubt and question the story. But with patience, they can have that story, but then they can sit and they can wait and they can see what comes through clarity. And that's what we have to do with our stories as well. So I'm going to point out, as I kind of summarize everything here, that we have two major arcana cards. And the fact that one is choice and one is about balance, I find that really, really interesting. It's almost like saying from the major arcana perspective that we have to learn how to balance our choices. And then for the minor cards, the fact that we have two pentacles and a wand, it's really saying that this is about like the life energy of the stories and the memories and how powerful and how potent they are when they come out, right? That's why we have a king here. King is the epitome of all of that energy and understanding how to use that energy to get the most out of it. And then we have pentacles that are basically saying we need to be grounded in ourselves. We need to be grounded. We need to practice grounding into ourselves and into who we are. And we need to really be able to take the time, right? That Two of Pentacles, it needs to take time to feel how all of that feels in the body and to feel how the choices and how the stories impact how that the body reacts. And then the Seven of Pentacles ends again by saying it takes time. It takes time. The memories will come back. The stories will surface. All of this is cyclical. It will all happen. And we need to take time to meet it in a new way every time, because every time it comes up, we are new. So I hope you enjoyed this reading. I found this one to be absolutely fascinating. And I will see you next week for our weekly reading. In the meantime, take care, and I will see you around the webs.